A Gahanna, Ohio police officer was arrested for OVI towards the end of January, and that's DUI by any other name. And it turns out it's not her first brush with the law. And for whatever reason, the city of Gahanna, Ohio does not want to leave any room for people to ask any questions. So we're going to do what we always do when we figure out that someone's trying to control the narrative. Let's talk about it. What's up, you guys? Welcome back to Southern Draw Law. My name is James White, criminal defense attorney, former prosecutor, former police officer. So the officer in question is 29-year-old Brenda Johnson. Now, here's what's funny about this story, and I don't mean funny, ha-ha. In 2021, July of 2021, the Gahanna, Ohio Police Department posted on their Facebook page this big ceremony they had where they pinned a badge on these officers. It was July of 2021. Depicted in these pictures receiving her badge is Officer Brenda Johnson. So that means that she's been a police officer in Gahanna since January-ish of 2021. Okay? That's 5 years. Well, I'm scrolling the interwebs the other day, and I come across this article from the Columbus Dispatch that said that there was a Gahanna, Ohio police officer that was charged with OVI. And I thought, that's interesting. So I go through and I read more of the article. And then the first line of the article itself says a Gahanna police officer has been relieved of duty by the city following her arrest for operating a motor vehicle while under the influence. And I thought, well, that was fast. So January 24th, she gets arrested. And by February 1st, she's relieved of duty. And then I read a little bit further. A felony charge against her of improperly handling a firearm in a motor vehicle for knowingly transporting a weapon while under the influence was dismissed at arraignment, a plea of not guilty. All right. So she's going to have a pretrial hearing scheduled for February 25th. And it says, meanwhile, Gahanna police are conducting an administrative investigation into the incident. And then it says, Johnson previously pleaded guilty in September of 2024 to a misdemeanor charge of physical control impaired, which is defined as being in the driver's position with access to the ignition key while under the influence of alcohol or drugs, even while parked. The charge was a result of an incident on May 6, 2024, involving New Albany police on the State Route 161 westbound exit ramp to US 62, court records show. A misdemeanor charge of improperly handling a firearm in a motor vehicle in that incident was also dismissed. Court records show Johnson paid a $50 fine, and her court costs were reduced by $72 to $50 for a total of a $100 payment, and her license was suspended with limited privileges until November 1st, 2024. So that means that the city of Gahanna knew they had a police officer that was a 3-year police officer in May of 2024 who was arrested for OVI. And though they showed her receiving her badge in this pride-filled moment that they wanted the public to know about, but they didn't mention that she had been arrested by the New Albany police for OVI for doing something, either sleeping in a vehicle while in physical control or being stopped and it got pled down to physical control in May of 2024. And they wanted to make sure that they framed the narrative to the media to make it seem like they had taken swift action. But I want to draw your attention to something. There was another article on Fox 28, and this says Gahanna police officer dismissed after OVI arrest. So we go through here, and it says a Gahanna police officer has been stripped of her badge. Well, okay, so dismissed is not the same as stripped of her badge, right? Anytime a police officer in most departments is on administrative leave, meaning they are not assigned any sort of law enforcement duties while they are being investigated. Anytime that happens, their badge and gun is taken because the idea is this thing is happening to you that might result in your termination or your suspension or whatever. We cannot have you out representing the city with your badge and gun while this is going on. So the headline is Gahanna police officer dismissed. And so when you read down here a little further, it says, well, she's been stripped of her badge. And then if you read down a little bit further, it tells basically how we got here. And then it says the Gahanna Police Department issued a statement. We were made aware of Officer Johnson's arrest by the Ohio State Highway Patrol and immediately took administrative action pursuant to our established policies. She has been relieved of duty and has no authority as a law enforcement officer. An administrative investigation is underway. Now, that is gaslighting. It's gaslighting 101. And I don't know whether the news is complicit or whether they're just taking the narrative from the police department themselves. But I want to say something. These people, these local news stations, I don't want to say they have no choice because we all have choices, but they build these relationships with these police departments, and they build them through the public information officer or maybe individual officers. They'll have reporters come and do ride-alongs, but they build these relationships and they leverage those relationships to get sort of like the first story or the breaking news or whatever. Well, pursuant to that sort of trade-off, they have to engage in a little bit of bullshit in order to get the cops to keep talking to them. And I think this is exactly what's happening here. It is completely disingenuous to suggest that this police officer in Ohio has been fired or terminated or dismissed. And that's exactly what the headline implies. Every single time I make a video, I make an intentional decision about what I want the headline to read. And my whole goal is to sort of build interest in the topic, be as honest as I possibly can, dangle a little bit of bait, but not truly clickbait. I want it to be as close to the absolute truth as possible, but I want to be able to give enough hyperbole or drama or whatever it is in order to get the audience interested enough to click on. You do the same thing with the thumbnail. So the idea that these people don't know what they're putting in their headlines is ridiculous. They know exactly what they're doing. And so either the media is intentionally colluding with the police to try to control the narrative, or they're burying their head in the sand and refusing to ask questions that a good investigative reporter would ask. Well, what do you mean by relieved of duty? Well, why does it say here that there's an administrative investigation underway? Has she been terminated? Is she still employed as a police officer? Are the taxpayers paying her to be home? The answer to all those questions is yes. And the reason I know that is because Ohio has an enormous FOP presence, and Gahanna specifically. And I will use an example of a recent officer-involved shooting to prove to you exactly what I'm talking about. There is a 0% chance that in 5 days they have already terminated or dismissed this police officer. And they just don't want you to know about the previous arrest. The only news report outlet that's reporting it is the Columbus Dispatch. But I want to show you something. Close to a year ago, the Gahanna Police Department had an officer-involved shooting where there was a 17-year-old who was thought to be in mental distress, and they came to the house in order to try to deal with that person, and they ended up with an officer-involved shooting after this person allegedly came at them with a knife. As you would generally see, they had some sort of an incident briefing after this shooting to sort of explain to the public what happened. And I want to show you just the very beginning of this briefing because I want you to see, hopefully you'll see what I see. The clip comes to us from the WBNS TV 10 news station. Let's take a look and just watch the first couple minutes of this press conference, and then I want to bring you back and explain to you what I see that I think you'll probably see too, but we'll get on the same page with it. Let's check it out.
Everybody, thank you for coming here this afternoon for this media briefing. I do want to let you know who you're going to be hearing from today and who is standing right over here. First of all, we have Brian Toth, Executive Vice President of the Fraternal Order of Police, Capital City Lodge number 9, Gahanna Chief of Police Jeff Spence, Gahanna Mayor Lori Jadwin, and Tim Becker, Gahanna's Director of Public Safety. But first, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Toth.
Thank you and good afternoon. Today in Gahanna, police officers were faced with a split-second decision that ultimately saved a life. Officers responded to a call involving a person in crisis who was armed with a knife and threatening to harm a family member. Despite repeated commands to drop the weapon and comply, the individual refused. Sadly, he made a choice to not surrender peacefully and comply with officers. The actions taken by our officers were in direct response to that threat posed by the suspect. Their decisions were driven by commitment to protect innocent lives. This incident is a stark reminder of the dangers law enforcement officers face every single day. Just weeks ago, a Hamilton County deputy sheriff was run down by a father that had lost his son. That deputy was killed. Yesterday, a Morrill County deputy was laid to rest after being fatally shot in a gun battle. 8 days ago, 2 Mifflin Township police officers were shot by a non-compliant citizen. One remains hospitalized. One has been since released with a long road to recovery. And last week, a Union County deputy was involved in a life or death shootout with an armed suspect. And hours earlier today, a police-involved shooting in Knox County, Ohio. And today, right here in Gahanna, officers were confronted with another life-threatening situation. A person in a mental health crisis brought a deadly weapon into a volatile situation and attempted to harm a loved one. Officers were left with no choice but to use deadly force to prevent a tragedy. Their swift actions not only saved the life of a victim, but they also immediately rendered life-saving aid to the wounded suspect. These are impossible situations, ones no officers hope to face ever in their career. But as law enforcement professionals, we have a sworn duty to protect and serve, and to take necessary action to stop imminent harm. That is exactly what Gahanna Police did today. Next up is Chief Spence.
Good afternoon. I'm going to brief you a little bit on the events leading up to this situation, and then, as you're well aware, this is an active investigation by BCI and our own internal detectives.
Okay, now feel free to watch the remainder of that video so you can have the body cam and all that stuff. But did you notice the sequencing of speakers here? That first person was not the chief of police. That was not the mayor. That was the executive vice president of the Fraternal Order of Police in Ohio. Now, let me tell you why that's weird. The Fraternal Order of Police is a private fraternal organization. The public cannot join it. The public cannot have a vote in the way it's run. The public can have no access to any of the benefits that the members have access to. The Fraternal Order of Police is nothing more than a labor union representing police officers. They owe no duty to the public. They have no outward interaction with the public. Why are we hearing from them on a press conference that's supposed to be given to the taxpayers and the citizens of this city? I mean, why are we even hearing from them at all? But surely there's some good explanation for why we're being told how we're supposed to feel about this incident by a union rep for the FOP before we hear from the chief of police, who is the person who's supposed to be in charge of the officers. Now, you guys are smart people. I don't have to explain to you that that whole thing is about gaslighting the public into believing that these officers were justified. Now, I don't have an opinion. I don't know anything about that case. I have no opinion about that. What I'm trying to say is, all you have to do is sort of pay attention to what's happening, and then you start to understand, oh, wait a minute. I'm being told by somebody who's not a stakeholder, who has no duty and responsibility to me whatsoever, who I wouldn't be able to go and ask questions to because he doesn't owe me a single second of his time. My tax dollars do not pay his salary. He's funded by private members' dues from police officers. Why is he talking to us about the way we're supposed to feel about this? So that's what you have in Ohio. Now, let's talk about Brenda Johnson. So her first charge was pled down to physical control. So just to sort of give you an idea, it's one of those things where it's a separate offense. So there could be a position where, let's say, you're not caught driving, but you're in physical control of the vehicle. You've got the keys in your pocket. Maybe you pulled over on the off-ramp and you went to sleep. It's obvious nobody else is around. Nobody could have driven you there. But then again, they can't actually prove that you were driving the vehicle. So Ohio law allows for that sort of secondary approach to convicting people, and it allows for a shorter suspension of the. She pled to physical control. Now, it said that she had an interaction with New Albany police on the exit ramp of some highway in Ohio. Now, we don't know because, again, this was in 2024 and they swept it completely under the rug. It's obvious this lady has had her now second OVI charge in 18 months, all within 5 years of becoming a police officer. They're not going to be able to sweep it under the rug this time, but they are doing as much as they possibly can to keep you from asking questions, and that's why we're talking about it. Because when you tell me that I shouldn't ask questions and you tell me how I'm supposed to feel about something and you do everything you can to try to ease my mind with the headlines and then bury the lead, oh, wait, this thing's not over at all. It's 5 days old. She's on administrative leave. That's when I have the questions. Okay, so that's what we need to be doing, is pressing to figure out what the actual answers are. Now, let's talk about another charge that keeps coming up, and we specifically know about it because it's generally charged when police officers are arrested for OVI in Ohio. But you'll remember that we had the situation in whatever it is, Orange Village or whatever, where the assistant chief of police, Patrick O'Callahan, was arrested a few months back, and we had an officer from a different department, I don't even remember the department now, named Spencer Lowe, and he was double good cop of the week. First, because he arrested a police officer that was DUI, but then in addition to that, his bosses went in and deleted the felony charge from his report, altered the documents, tampered with the evidence, all that stuff. And then the FOP then came out and defended him as a whistleblower. Okay. So remember that Patrick O'Callahan was charged with improper handling of firearm because Ohio cops seem to be of the opinion that they can charge anybody who has a loaded firearm in the vehicle with them if they're DUI or OVI. And so you might look at this situation and you think, well, okay, they're just letting cops off the hook because, they don't want to hit them with a felony. And that may be true, and I don't want to discount it completely. But what I will say is that sequencing matters. And if I was going to be defending the police officers, or if I was a member of the FOP, or if I was even the prosecutor looking at this situation, I might say, well, okay, they have to have their gun and their badge on them at all times pursuant to policy. So let's say that Officer Johnson went out today and she decided to go get lunch and she's off duty. She goes out, let's say dinner, let's say 5, 6 o'clock. She goes to the mall. She does a little shopping. She's got her gun and her badge, and she puts the gun in her glove box. She doesn't take it into the mall with her. And then she runs into somebody. Maybe she loses track of the evening. She has a couple drinks and she comes back out to the vehicle. Now, let's assume for a second she's impaired, legally impaired, and she's DUI, but she hasn't touched the gun that's been in the glove box. And she's not actually handling the gun, right? She's just transporting a gun. Yes, maybe she's intoxicated, but the problem is you can't prove that she knowingly handled a firearm during the pendency of the time when she was intoxicated. And that's the issue, because you have to prove contemporaneous intent with the things that you're doing. And so if your whole theory of arresting someone for a felony gun charge is they mishandled a firearm because they knowingly handled it or transported it while they were intoxicated. Well, the thing is, you can't prove when the gun got in the car. You can't prove that the gun wasn't there 5 days ago. And you can't prove that she wasn't carrying the gun simply because it's part of her policy and she never handled the gun while she was intoxicated. So it's impossible to prove that during the period that she was legally intoxicated, she also handled the gun, unless you happen to take it off her person or they're armed at the time, right? So that's one of those situations where there are probably a whole lot of regular people that get charged with that and don't find their way to a lawyer willing to make those arguments for them or whatever, and it might look like favoritism. And it might actually be favoritism. It might just be like a sort of an easy pass for a prosecutor to say, well, I'm not going to prosecute a cop for having a gun on him, and then hide behind that intent standard. But I believe I could get anybody, unless you got my client with the gun strapped to his person or actively handling it while it was DUI, I believe you could beat that charge on just about anybody if you're willing to put the work in and get it suppressed. Because the truth is, you can't prove intent or when the gun got in the vehicle or anything like that. In closing, the only thing I want to say about this situation is another flashback to the Gahanna Police Department's Facebook page. They put up this notice that basically said the entire city is closing down its operations. Non-emergency services are not working. Stay home, be careful, whatever. It looks pretty bad that the night before you're putting this public notice out. Surely the weather was inclement again on the 24th, the night that this happened. And this officer's out driving drunk in weather so bad that the next day you're having to eliminate services to tax-paying citizens. And they're doing everything they possibly can to try to keep people from taking an interest in this story. And we need to ask questions, okay? We need to wonder why. Why did we not hear about this? when you have a 3-year police officer getting arrested for OVI and accepting a sweetheart deal. And oh, by the way, why did we allow her to be a police officer in 2024 when she had a partially suspended driver's license because she just pled guilty to an OVI or some lesser, it's not a lesser included, but some, less culpable offense related to OVI. The impaired part was there such that her driver's license was suspended. Why was the public not put on notice about that? Why does it take a news station finding out about like the 24-hour arrest records or whatever, looking this stuff up? This is the second time. The first time it got by and you guys said nothing. You wanted us to know when she became a police officer. You were proud of that. But you didn't mention that 3 years later she gets an arrest. And you finally did come out and respond when she gets arrested for a second time in 18 months for OVI. This officer might have a substance abuse problem. And the other thing is, the FOP is going to fight tooth and nail to get her rehab instead of getting her fired. So you've really screwed the pooch by coming out here and pretending with the news and colluding with journalists to try to come up with this narrative so that people won't poke around and ask questions. Folks, pay attention on February 25th. And start asking questions to your representatives in Gahanna, Ohio, to find out what exactly the story is as it relates to Officer Brenda Johnson. Because when you tell me that I should not worry, I'm going to start worrying, right? I've learned that the most frightening thing I can hear as an American citizen is, I'm with the government and I'm here to help. Or I'm with the government and you have nothing to worry about. That's horseshit. If you're with the government, I definitely have something to worry about. So anyway, that's all for this one, guys. I hope you got something from it. I don't know the answers to this stuff. All I have are the questions. You guys tell me what you think about it. Does it stink to you the way it stinks to me? Something about it seems off to me, but I'm curious to hear what you guys have to say about it in the comments. I'd like to invite you to check us out on all the socials. I'll put up a QR code here for you to scan with your phone. That'll take you to the Linktree site where you can check us out on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, and Substack. You can join on a paid tier Substack if you want to, but that's only for people who want to support the channel monetarily. I don't put anything on these platforms that people have to pay for. If you don't want to follow us to other platforms, but you'd like to support monetarily, I'll leave my Venmo and PayPal links both here on the screen as well as in the description. Please remember to like and subscribe and leave a comment on the video. Check out some of the other videos on the channel. Leave a comment on there as well. Until I see you again, take care. Always film your interactions with the police and keep your evidence to yourself.